Today we're talking about new evidence that suggests the existence of extraterrestrial life. That and other space and UFO news right now on Spacing Out. Greetings everyone and welcome to Spacing Out. I'm Jason McClellan. My wonderful co-host Maureen isn't with us today. She's off working on a special project, but she'll be back in a couple weeks, so don't worry. Before we talk about news stories, I want to remind you about the International UFO Congress. It's swiftly approaching, so if you're interested in attending, I suggest booking your tickets soon. This 5-day conference features more than 20 speakers presenting on a variety of topics related to UFOs and extraterrestrials. The International UFO Congress takes place in a town just outside of Phoenix, Arizona called Fountain Hills, and the event runs from February 27th through March 3rd. So check out ufocongress.com for all the information and to purchase your tickets. Maureen and I will be there, and we'd love to meet you there. She and I will be opening the event with a brief overview of the top UFO-related stories of 2012. So again, ufocongress.com has all the information on that, so check it out. Now let's talk about some of the stories that have made headlines recently. Scientists published a paper on January 10th in the online Journal of Cosmology in which they claim that a meteorite discovered in Sri Lanka contains evidence of extraterrestrial life. The paper, titled Fossil Diatoms in a New Carbonaceous Meteorite, asserts that microscopic fossilized diatoms, a type of algae, were detected in the meteorite and therefore provide strong evidence to support the theory of cometary panspermia. Business Day explains that the lead scientist on the paper, the director of the University of Buckingham Center for Astrobiology, Professor Chandra Wickramasinghe, was the co-developer of the theory of panspermia, which holds that life exists across the universe and is spread by asteroids and meteoroids. But not everyone agrees with the team's findings. Astronomer Phil Plait of Slate magazine feels the claims made by the paper's authors are flawed. He first points to a possible bias on the part of the paper's lead scientist. Talking about panspermia, Plait explains, Wickramasinghe is a fervent proponent of it, like really fervent, so much so that he attributes everything to life in space. He said that the flu comes from space. He said SARS comes from space. Wickramasinghe jumps on everything with little or no evidence and says it's from outer space. So I think there's a case to be made for a bias on his part. Plait contacted Patrick Kosiolek, a professor of ecology and evolutionary biology at the University of Colorado at Boulder, to get his take on the findings published in the paper. Kosiolek appears to share Plait's criticism of the story. In Kosiolek's opinion, there certainly is not any sign of diatoms being fossilized. If that's true, it pokes a pretty big hole in the assumption that the diatoms must be native to a meteorite. Plait points out that all the diatoms shown in the paper are from known species on Earth. For Kosiolek, it's a clear case of contamination with freshwater. Lee Spiegel of the Huffington Post contacted Wickramasinghe and asked him to comment on Plait's criticisms. He responded, "If only ideas that are considered orthodox are given support through awards of grants or publication opportunities, it is certain that progress of science will be stifled, as it was through the Middle Ages." He also told Spiegel that he doesn't deny the meteorite contains freshwater diatoms, as asserted by Plait, but Wickramasinghe claims the meteorite also contains at least half a dozen species that diatom experts have not been able to identify. SpaceX Dragon space capsule is preparing for another flight to the International Space Station. This will be the third trip under the company's Commercial Resupply Services contract, or CRS, with NASA. Like the previous flights, the capsule will deliver food, supplies, and science experiments to the International Space Station. Discovery News reports that SpaceX has requested a March 1st launch date. As we mentioned before on this show, the Dragon capsule was designed with manned missions in mind, but no approximate dates had been offered for when those might happen. Well, Garrett Reisman, SpaceX project manager and former NASA astronaut, made a surprise announcement at a press event at Kennedy Space Center last week. He revealed the company's plans to launch a crew into low Earth orbit as early as 2015. According to the Space Reporter, SpaceX plans to send a hand-picked crew of employees on its maiden human-bearing voyage. No word yet on whether company founder Elon Musk will be among the crew. On Sunday, January 20th, officials announced that data from NASA's Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, the MRO, and ESA's Mars Express spacecraft provide evidence of a wet underground environment and clues that suggest a groundwater-fed lake could have existed in McClellan Crater, a crater 57 miles in diameter and 1.4 miles deep. As RedOrbit.com explains, researchers suspect a lake inside McClellan Crater would have been fed by groundwater because McClellan lacks large inflow channels, and small channels originating within the crater wall end near a level that could have marked the surface of a lake. Spectrometer data collected by MRO indicates that flat, layered rocks in the crater contain carbonate and clay minerals, suggesting the presence of water. Joseph Mikulski, the research paper's lead author, believes it is likely the carbonate formed within a lake-style environment rather than being carried into McClellan crater from an external source. According to the Daily Mail, Mikulski feels that all the ingredients were there for life, but only small single-cell organisms could have survived in those conditions. Still, the new data is exciting, and Mikulski optimistically stated, "But I would now be more surprised if there was never any life on Mars than I would be if we did one day discover that simple life lived in that environment. And if life existed then, there is a chance it could still exist now." Researchers believe this is the strongest evidence yet that Mars may have supported life. The team's research results were published in the online edition of the journal Nature Geoscience. Philip Coppens passed away on December 30th, 2012. Philip was a Belgian author and investigative journalist who explored mysteries from ancient history, including those potentially involving extraterrestrials. He regularly appeared on the History Channel's program Ancient Aliens, and he recently spoke at the Paradigm Symposium in Minneapolis back in October. And joining me today to tell us more about Philip and his work is one of the producers of the Paradigm Symposium, Micah Hanks. Micah, thanks so much for joining us today.
It's my pleasure, Jason, as always.
Well, I'm excited to talk with you about Philip. You certainly knew Philip more than I did. I didn't have a chance to meet him at the Paradigm Symposium, but I'd love for you to share with us your thoughts on Philip. Tell us who he was and a little bit about the work he did.
Well, Philip, he was, in my opinion, one of those, those bright stars among not just the Ancient Aliens crowd, but also really, in conspiracy circles, ufology. He was really an expert in a variety of different areas of interest. And Philip was kind of the exception to the rule. The skeptics called him a believer. The believers called him a skeptic. Philip was one of those people who was okay with kind of straddling the fence because he wasn't looking for a bias or a preconception. He was someone who was really looking for facts. His theories about Atlantis had been influenced greatly, by his, those who in his region, in parts of Europe had studied the ancient megalithic sites and things like that. And this kind of helped him to formulate his own ideas about, these ancient mysteries that many would associate with, literal conspiracy theories and just kind of hocus pocus. Coppens literally thought that there was an actual foundation in history for a physical Atlantis that could be found in megalithic sites throughout parts of Europe. And of course, when he approached these similar lines of thought in terms of ancient times and ancient interactions humans may have had with extraterrestrials, it was very much the same sort of thing. He wasn't the kind of person that was going to put out a lot of woo theories. He really was someone who tried to remain grounded, but very well open-minded to different kinds of possibilities and potentials. He was an expert on the Kennedy assassination. He, of course, took interest in UFOs after kind of getting into the work of William Cooper, the conspiracy theorist whose research kind of paralleled that of the Kennedy assassination just as well. And so it led him in a lot of different directions. With regard to Paradigm Symposium, Philip was perfect because we try not to get into that, this side versus that side. We try to be very welcoming. And I personally, as a researcher, have always tried to gravitate toward people who are a little bit more in that what I call the radical center. Philip Coppens was perhaps the best example of people who would do that and would accept the skepticism just as well as the potential for belief when the evidence warranted such.
He seemed very broad in his research, and I love that focus on ancient mysteries. And He authored a few books, and do you know where people can go to read more about Philip and check out his books? He's got a website, right? philipcoppens.com?
That is correct. His website is still available, and of course he authored books like The Ancient Alien Question, The Lost Civilization Enigma, both put up by New Page Books. Those are available on Amazon.com and in bookstores everywhere. And then there were a variety of ebooks authored by Philip Coppens that are available at his website as well as on Amazon.com.
Okay, great. Well, speaking about ancient mysteries, Micah, I wanted to get your thoughts here on this news story we just talked about, this evidence of an ancient lake on Mars. And we keep finding more and more evidence supporting that the thought that there may have been extraterrestrial life in some form or another at one point on Mars, and perhaps may still be. So I've never talked with you about your thoughts on Mars and finding extraterrestrial life on Mars, but what do you think about that?
It's funny because when we look at this culturally, we've come from just a little over a century ago thinking that it was a very stark potential that there were literally beings on a planet like Mars, very close to us in our solar system, maybe beings even like us. Nowadays, our hopes are a little lessened, but we are still nonetheless as excited as ever about that potential, maybe not even of finding life on Mars today, so much as just being able to prove that at some point in the past there could have been life on Mars. When you have such things as water, especially even if that water is underground, but water, of course, and moisture and these sorts of things, that is the beginning of an habitable, or rather a kind of an area that can be habitable by simple life forms. And we're not looking at something that's going to be very complex. We're looking at very simple, single cellular life forms that we're talking about here. But even that little potential there for there being such a simple beginning of life on a planet other than here on Earth, that's an exciting potential. And I think that as our search for life elsewhere in the cosmos continues, we've kind of lessened our expectations somewhat. I think that the ufologists, of course, hold dear to this idea that maybe they will drop down on the White House lawn at some point. But when it comes to the potentials for life on Mars, we're looking for something minuscule and something that may not even longer be there. This could be something that was long ago. But if it ever existed on Mars, again, that shows us that life could have existed on another planet in our solar system. And if habitable conditions do occur in other parts of the solar system, that in itself will be a great leap and bound.
Well, extraterrestrial life, as you know, is a controversial subject in mainstream science. And I think we pointed out a lot on this show that mainstream science seems to disagree with itself all the time on everything, not only extraterrestrial life. But in the case of this meteorite, where scientists claim that there are fossilized evidence of extraterrestrial life, fossilized algae in this meteorite, you have some scientists saying, yes, our data proves this, and others saying, your research is flawed. And that's a recurring theme. And I know I've talked with you about this before, just scientists not agreeing with each other. It's similar in ufology. Ufologists don't agree with each other. There's just this constant back and forth of my side is right, my side is right. And I think that's just human nature.
I think it is too. In a scientific sense, this is why I would love to see, especially in our field of research, ufology and the related, anomalous sciences, I would love to see a bit more peer review, because as opposed to people going out and making what really, Jason, I think amount to being primarily, personal attacks against people based on ideological differences, if there were a little bit more peer review and people could, weigh the different opinions in a more scholarly way, I think that we would be able to come to a better consensus about what different kinds of phenomena may be underlying not just our search for UFOs and extraterrestrial life, but again, an entire host of different kinds of phenomena that may be existent right here in our midst. I've often said that we'll really have to fundamentally kind of change, the way that we go about our research and trying to understand these sorts of things. I think that part of the problem lies in that we're often dealing with phenomena, or if it's in an academic sense, if we're traveling to Mars and looking for what kinds of life might exist, or even, the potentials of finding something similar to what we would expect of life here on Earth, but in a meteorite that maybe crash landed here on Earth, traveling from someplace elsewhere in the cosmos, we're always dealing with a problem in terms of how we want to try and approach the study, and opinions get mixed. And one group's going to say this is, again, to borrow the term that people have been using in relation to a meteorite found, I believe in Sri Lanka, rock solid evidence of life elsewhere. Whereas other people are going to say, no, you're jumping to conclusions. We have to have a consistent methodology that can be applied to this sort of thing. And within the field of ufology, bringing it home again, we do need to be able to be a little bit more concise in terms of our approach, and I think that a bit of peer review might help with that. But then again, how do you do that? Many would say, well, this isn't an academic field. The academic sciences don't recognize such things as alien sciences as they pertain to UFOs. Perhaps they do in a cosmological sense. Maybe we could remedy that. There are plenty of PhD professors and qualified scientists who have taken interest in ufology, and we're maybe getting around to that point again after many decades of kind of treating this as water cooler subject matter. We may be getting back around to to a time where, academic scientists are willing to come back around and explore these potentials. And if we can have a pairing of those who are maybe in the civilian branch of this, or just researchers and journalists like ourselves, and pair that information that folks like we can gather along with that academic approach, again, there is a good potential for being able to bring more scientific peer review, and then thus applying a methodology to trying to understand what sorts of potentials may exist in terms of discovering life, whether it be elsewhere or, perhaps even having traveled here in a meteorite.
I agree. That's the right. I think that's the right approach, and it's debatable. That in this particular case of the meteorite, the paper in which the study was published, it's supposedly a peer-reviewed journal, but Phil Plait from Slate magazine poked fun at the journal and said it's known for publishing things without really doing research and looking into the data. And so you're always going to have people, even if you do have solid peer review set up, people are going to question the validity of that research and the people doing the peer review. It's just back and forth, and it's unfortunate that scientists tend to, I don't know, I guess have difficulty having a scientific mind and wanting to look at data, see what data has been come up with, and review that data, and putting personal feelings and biases aside. That the field of astrobiology has really taken a serious look at the theory of panspermia. There are many astrobiologists who think that's a solid theory, but then you have other scientists who think it's hokey and won't even bother looking at data that's collected if they see anything related to panspermia. So I think a lot of personal biases get in the way of pure science.
Yeah, again, there are a lot of what I would call personal attacks that are, kind of launched against one another. And we see scientists doing this just as well as researchers in our field. I was speaking with the editor of a popular magazine yesterday who had said, that they'd had to end relations with a very well-known researcher from several decades ago. And the reason why is because she had felt that this individual had always taken a very personal approach toward dealing with others in the field of ufology. And while I understand, and it's okay that people have their own personal opinions and their own, their heart's desires and their feelings, and that they're passionate. We do need people who are passionate about what they do in this field. By the same token, there's this stark reality that, if you're going to be launching attacks and criticisms all the time, you're not really going to be progressing. And in order to progress, again, it's nothing bad, when journalists want to, get into little dogfights about, what their theories are and what the best approach is. But when we deal with things scientifically, again, I think that there has to be real serious peer review. In the instance with the journal that had published the issue about the Sri Lankan meteorite, I believe it was the Journal of Cosmology, and this, of course, being an online publication, it had come into question whether actual real academic standards were applied to their quote-unquote peer review process. There are standards for this sort of a thing, and when we talk about things in scientific terms, and we're going to be publishing research in a format where all can see this, and of course it's put forth to an academic community of people who are going to apply scrutiny from multidisciplinary backgrounds to this. You have to really be able to have a clear, concise methodology that is applied to this. We could draw a similar parallel to this entire issue that's erupted. It has nothing to do with ufology, but Mel Ketchum and the supposed sequencing of what they call Sasquatch DNA. Now, obviously, I think a lot of us have problems with this general premise. First of all, we're claiming to have sequenced the DNA of a creature which is, at present, not believed by science to exist. And although there's, I feel, some credible evidence that supports the potential existence of a beast like what we call the Sasquatch or the Bigfoot of North America, abominable snowman and Yeti in other parts of the world, assuming that there's some sort of a similar creature. By the same token, there doesn't seem to be a lot of hard evidence that can be applied to things such as a physical specimen, at least none that I know of, and I follow this pretty closely. And yet we're talking about, the sequencing of DNA. If the information were available and if it were really undergoing the kind of peer review that we would expect in the scientific realm these days, I would think that there would be a lot less question about the nature of this study. And who knows, we may all be proven wrong, and this may be the thing that finally proves conclusively that humankind has a very near, not an ancestor, an actual cousin in our midst here existent today. It doesn't seem that that's where things are going right now. And again, I think it's because of this kind of lacking methodology that's applied to the peer review process, even when those do seek to come forth and go about it in a more scientific manner. So if we can apply the proper methodology, get the proper kind of peer review, I think that there will be less room for argument after the fact. And you can always have opinions and dispute, but when there's science behind it, it's a little bit less, easily disputed when it's put forth to the public like that.
Well, I agree with you. I think your theory is sound, but I think many out there will refute your claims and think that your argument is flawed, because that's how science works.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And science, I think everybody has a different idea about how science works too these
That's
days,
right.
Jason. Science, again, I like to remind people, science is primarily a tool, really. It is an approach that we apply to trying to understand things about the nature of our reality around us. And, when people refer to science as though it's a Bible or a dictionary or a compendium that has all the summation of all mankind's knowledge, and that's a complete document and that we know everything, that's when you begin to find that science is a problem. Science should never be viewed as a set of constants, immovable standards. Science is a growing process. It's a living document, if you want to consider it that. It's something that is always changing, growing, and there's always room for revising theories. And in that sense, maybe one's approach to what science is could effectively differ and appropriately differ from that of another.
Well said, Micah. It's always a blast talking to you. Thanks so much for talking with me today and filling in for Maureen's absence today. And for those of you who want to see more of Micah Hanks, he will be joining us at the International UFO Congress. So come out and see Micah in person. He's always a blast in person, more than he is on Skype. So thanks again, Micah. We'll see you soon.
Absolutely, as always, and stay strange out there, okay?
You got it, bud. Well, that's all for this episode of Spacing Out. Be sure to visit openminds.tv for all the latest news. We always look forward to your feedback, so make sure to leave comments below the video on YouTube, and you can always email us at contact@openminds.tv. And be sure to leave your comments for Maureen to let her know how much you missed her this week. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Jason McClellan. We will see you in the future.